Alright, so we're back working on the Raptor and we are installing a dash cam, a Thinkware Q1000 dash cam to be specific. Now whenever I selected this, I was looking specifically for a 1440p dash cam, but I did not want a full 4K. What I would have liked to have purchased would have been a Blackview dash cam, but they didn't have one in QHD. They only had UHD, so I looked around, I looked at the Viofo, but I decided to just go with the Thinkware. I thought that it was probably a better brand and a higher quality than the Viofo was. It is 2-channel, so it has a front and a rear. And it also has the capability as advertised that you can use it remotely, right? So you can gain access to your video remotely and use it remotely, which is what the whole reason that I purchased it. And I ran into some issues, which I'll talk about later. And so there are a few accessories that you need to purchase, or that you should purchase. A should purchase is this polarizing filter that goes over the lens, just to make sure that you don't have any issues with glare and reflections while it's recording. And then the second thing that you need, that you absolutely have to have, is for an F150 or for the Raptor, is you need the extended cable. You cannot buy the kit with the extended cable. You have to buy the extended cable separately, which is really annoying. You can't just buy it with the longer one. You have to get it with the shorter one and then purchase it separately. I went through this entire install and didn't find out until the end that you needed the longer cable. The kit that I bought didn't come with an SD card, and I normally buy, I think it's SanDisk SD cards, but the only one that was available for me was this Samsung. And Samsung's great for SSDs. That's what I always run for an SSD, so I figured, why not give it a shot. I am doing a few wire connections just in preparation, one of them being for a fuse tap. I'm going to use a fuse tap for the connection which signals the ignition. The dash cam is actually really interesting. It kind of acts as its own relay, so it has a signal wire that goes to an ignition wire, and then it has another wire that runs straight to the battery. And you can control all of the configurations for that inside of the device through the app. So you can set up whether or not you want it to run off of your starter battery, and you don't want it to run when it's turned off at all without ignition. And then you could also set it up to run off of, let's say, a house battery, or if you do want it to run off of your starter battery, but shut off after a very short period of time, you can set that up also. There are a lot of different configurations, which I was pretty impressed with, that you can get set up. What I'm setting this up for is to run off of a house battery on a dual battery setup that I have. I have a second battery, a lithium iron phosphate that's set up in the truck bed, and I'm just going to end up running a power cable all the way to the rear, but I still have a fuse tap set up for the interior. The first thing that I'm getting ready to install here is a heat shield. It comes with this special sticker heat shield. It's apparently supposed to prevent the dash cam from overheating whenever it gets really hot outside. It sticks to the windshield, and then the dash cam sticks to it. The dash cam is supposed to be completely centered, but I wanted it a little bit offset so that I could tuck it away next to the rear view mirror and not beneath it. I wanted it as tight up as possible, completely out of my field of view, so I wouldn't have to worry about it. So once you get it set, you can pull off the cover just above the rear view camera and start running all of your wires up into the headliner. Now, the power wire is at a right angle, so there's no issue there. You can get it pretty tight. but the actual video cable that runs to the second channel, the camera in the rear, you either have a right angle wire or you have a straight wire. You're supposed to run the straight wire to the front camera, but I ended up running the angled wire, cut the extra space inside of that trim piece above the rear view mirror, and then set everything up. Whenever you go to do the longer cable, you're not able to do that, and I'll show that here in a little bit. So in order to set up the fuse tap and to run all of the wires, you have to pull off this grab handle in the A-pillar and then run the wires from the headliner down back behind the A-pillar, back behind the handle. Make sure when you're doing this that none of these wires are interfering with the operation of that curtain airbag. They need to be completely clear of it and behind it. The passenger footwell has a fuse panel, and that's where I'm going to be running my fuse tap. I do have a couple other things in there. One of them that I already have set up is an ignition signal wire for my battery charger that runs to the truck bed, and then the other one is for a power outlet that I have set up in the for my phone charger up on the dash. First thing you need to do is connect the ground. I'm using this grounding bolt that's already set up here, but the ground that they give you doesn't fit on there properly, so I had to bend it open a little bit to actually get it to fit on. It's been a while now since I've installed this. I would recommend that you get a multimeter and test all of these to make sure that the one that you're installing the fuse tap into is an ignition only wire and not on all the time. Just double check everything to make sure, because I know there's differences between the year models, and I had found some specific ones that were ignition only, but the fuse taps wouldn't fit, and then different brands of fuse taps don't fit. So just it's a huge pain, but you got to figure that out on your own. Grab all this excess wire, zip tie it, tuck it away, make sure that nothing's going to snag on it, and pull it out. The actual power wire I'm running through a grommet in the floor, and then I'm going to run it to the truck bed because that's where my house battery is. But if you're running this directly to the front battery, you can do that, or you can do a separate fuse tap that runs to an always-on fuse inside the passenger footwell. That's probably the easiest way to do it, but I know fuse taps aren't great, and I know there's probably going to be a lot of comments saying never use a fuse tap. So that you're going to have to figure that out on your own, which way you want to go. So usually whenever you're running wire underneath the vehicle, you're going to want it inside of some conduit. I didn't actually end up running it in any conduit. I have conduit set up, but that's like some 2-gauge wire that I'm running specifically to the battery. So get it up on top of the frame as much as you can and out of the way so it doesn't snag on any rocks or sticks or anything that's on the ground or road debris. Just make sure it's up and out of the way. Here I am trying to push the wire through the grommet that runs into the truck bed. I couldn't get it fixed. The next several minutes are going to be a giant detour from the actual install of the camera itself, right? So this thing just needs to go to a battery positive. That's all you need. You've already got a ground, you just need a battery positive. I could not get it to install through the grommet, so I ended up figuring out that I'm gonna have to pull out my entire one side of the deck system that I have set up in order to access the appropriate wiring. So the setup that I have in the truck bed is pretty significant. I have a switch panel, I have a fuse panel, I have several relays, I have some bus bars, and I'm trying to keep everything as tucked away as possible and as organized as possible and as much of it as I can inside of conduit. And there's not a whole lot of space underneath the deck system, but there's definitely enough to hold, I have a 100 amp hour lithium ion phosphate battery, as well as a air compressor underneath the deck system and the battery charger, everything underneath the deck system. So it fits. I just had to get creative with how I set it up. I'll tell you, I'm obviously not an electrician, so I was very cautious with all of this, and I didn't do a video on it, even though I did it recently. I didn't do a video on it specifically because for the most part I just don't know what I'm doing 100%, right? And I wouldn't want to do a video making recommendations or showing things that I 100%, I'm not 100% about. So once I finally got all that stuff out of the way, I was able to move the deck system enough. I ran a wire down back through the grommet that runs to the exterior of the truck bed, grabbed it from the bottom, connected that to my power wire, and then pulled it through. Alright, so once you finally get your wire where it needs to go, make sure that you have the appropriate length and cut it, strip it, install the appropriate connector, whether or not that's directly to the battery or if you're running to a bus bar like I am, make sure that you have the appropriate size connector. Heat shrink's good. Make sure that it's protected as possible. Like I said, I also recommend that you have some sort of shielding over top of the wire so you're not running just bare wire that's unprotected. Yay, now that the disaster of installing the power wire is done, I decided to go the opposite direction so that I'm not running the video cable. I'm sure it's shielded, but I didn't want to run the video cable directly over a power wire. Just like on the passenger side, your goal is to get the wire through a grommet that's on the floor, run underneath the truck all the way back to the truck bed. Now if you don't have a topper like I do and you're not running it to the actual truck bed, this short wire will be perfectly fine. You can run it inside of the cab and you don't need to, you can even run it through the headliner instead of down to the floor. That's going to be a lot easier. This is specifically for a topper, right? Because I have that the smart cap. So I tucked it back behind everything in front of the hood opener, and then I'm going to run it to this grommet that's right under the floor. And my whole plan to not run it with a power wire was ruined because I forgot that the smart cap wire runs in the same area. So there might be a little bit of electromagnetic interference, but I haven't really noticed any issues. I used a razor blade to cut this grommet hole a little larger, make sure that there's enough space. This is a little more challenging with the video cable just because it does have the connector attached, right? You can't cut it off so you have a smooth wire. So you're gonna have that micro USB attached at the front end, and you're gonna have to have enough space to actually push that through everything and get it around everything on your way to where the camera's at. There are a couple of grommets underneath. The Ford grommet that I pushed it through comes out on top of this little subframe area. There's a little gap in there. So it created this whole mess because some of the wire went one way, some of the wire went the other way. So I would just, whenever you first start pushing it through, make sure that you guide it through appropriately to where you want it to go, whether or not it's this large opening or what I did eventually, which was run it in a different direction. But I just wanted to get all the wire through the cab so that I could close the door. So I just pulled it all through, capped off that little grommet, and then put everything back together inside the cab. On the top here, you'll see that other grommet that you could have pushed it through. Again, I went through the Ford one instead, and I had to try and fish it out through this little gap here. But pull that all the way through, make sure you route it. I ended up just doing what I said I didn't want to do, like I said, and following the power wire. Get it on top of the frame as much as possible, not on the side, and make sure that you get it on top. And I ran the wire first, and then I went back and zip tied everything afterward, right? So find as many locations as you can to zip tie it. Sometimes there are other wiring harnesses. For this side specifically, there is another wiring harness that you can follow. Make sure that it doesn't interfere with any moving parts or moving locations. You definitely don't want to like wrap it around the leaf spring because it's going to break, right? So make sure it's on top of everything as much as possible. Alright, so the goal is to get it behind the driver's side rear tire so that you can push it up through the gap behind the panel and then pull it up through the tail light area. So you see here I'm feeding it up, I pulled it out, and then spent a really long time trying to shove that enormous connector through the same hole that I also had the power wire for the smart cap hooked up. So I finally got it through, and then I got really sad because I realized that the cable was too short. And I was very disappointed. So I ended up zip tying it and then ordering an extension because I thought that that was the smart right answer. I didn't want to spend all the money on a new cable because they're a little expensive, the longer ones are, so I just got an extension that I found on Amazon, but it took like a week to order. So I connected, a week later, I connected the new extension and I set up the camera, and there was a lot of interference. You cannot use an extension. I bought like the highest quality extension that I could too, which was like half the price of a new cable. I basically just threw money away. Whenever it's connected to the actual cable, it's nice with no interference. So I just took the extra time immediately and ended up ordering the longer cable that you just have to. The extension still kind of worked, so I decided to just go ahead and install the rear camera anyway. Even if I wasn't hooking up the new cable, I probably would have just installed the camera so I wasn't wasting time, right? I only have so many opportunities where I have the available time to do things, so I tried to center the camera as much as possible, pushed it on there. It was a little cold in Washington at this point in time, so I ended up using a heat gun to try to heat up all the surfaces and get maximum adhesion. Once I got it set up, I pulled off the lens protector and then made sure that the camera worked, and it did. I still had all of those weird little lines of interference, but I expected that, and I was going to have to order the longer cable at that point. You will need to use some sticky cable managers in order to run the wire properly. If you have a fiberglass cap, it's probably not that big of a deal, but this metal cap, like, nothing sticks to the exterior. I'm pretty sure it's just a wrap. I don't think it's actually painted or anything or powder coated. So I wiped everything down with alcohol, heated it up, made sure that it would adhere as much as possible, and then stuck it on, running the wire all the way through. Whenever I got the longer cable, like I said, I did have an issue with the direction that it had to be run. You have to run the straight portion on the front and then the angled portion in the rear. So if I had accounted for that previously, I probably would have trimmed or cut the trim more to allow that cable to run through. So here are some clips from my trip across the country. Again, this is another reason that I purchased this, was specifically for the road trip, to make sure that I had video in case something happened. But I caught some interesting instances, and that's what I'm showing you here while I was driving across the country. I took the northern route, which was a mistake, but overall I really like the camera. I think that it was a great purchase, but if I had to do it again, I might have just gone with the black view anyway, one of the ones that has the built-in LTE connection, because you cannot just use this camera unless you have a wireless connection, right? So if you're trying to get notifications that someone hit your vehicle while you're inside of a store, you have to have a connection, right? Like the camera doesn't have its own LTE. So what I ended up doing was getting a Verizon Jetpack. I used one for like 20 bucks, and then just adding it to my account for $8 a month is what I think it costs. And I have that plugged in. It runs on its own battery whenever the car is turned off, and then it charges whenever the car is turned on. So now the camera always has some sort of connectivity, and I'll get notifications if something happens. But otherwise, the camera's great, and I do recommend it. So hopefully, if you're planning on installing a dash cam of any kind, this gave you a better idea of how to do that and the requirements. I'll put a link down below obviously for the camera, but also for the extended wire that is required. If you have a cap and you're trying to run it all the way to the back of the vehicle, you're going to need that. So I'll put that down below. But otherwise, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week.